pro-Palestinian protesters are planning to march on the 11th of November. The protesters are demanding an immediate ceasefire on Gaza. Hundreds and thousands of people are expected to attend the marches. However, MPs have criticised these marches, saying that they would be inappropriate in calling for the military to be drafted in to keep the peace. But this isn't the first time that protests have got out of hand when it comes to the Israel-Hamas conflict. A man has been arrested after boxes of live mice were released into McDonald's restaurants in Birmingham. Take a look at this.
أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني.
So the mice were released into different branches all over Birmingham, and they were dyed the colours of the Palestinian flag. So with the potential that these protests could get out of hand, should they be cancelled, Tessa?
I feel that sometimes, dare I suggest, our politicians add fuel to the fire when they sort of stomp about on the respective public platforms, insisting that things are going to get out of hand and drawing in the army. And heavens above, with tumultuous concern, because I'm a great believer in the cenotaph, in Armistice Day. I work extensively with the last few remaining veterans who served in World War II. So I clickety-clacked like a keyboard warrior onto my computer to find out if really on Sunday, when we have the commemorative service, the cenotaph will be the sort of celebrated centre of our nation, whether that would indeed be sort of held hostage by Palestinian flags and puffs of green smoke. And in fact, the protests that are booked in effectively, because you have to ask for legal permission and get police permission, are on Armistice Day, which is on the Saturday. The remembrance services are on the Sunday. I think we need to be clear there. Therefore, there isn't going to be a big parade of vulnerable veterans and royalty on the same day that the protests are taking place.
But it is on that
the
weekend.
11th. Indeed.
And as you said, we're seeing the last of our veterans surviving. This might be their last Remembrance Sunday, their last Armistice Day. Is it a solemn day we need to keep completely clear of any kind of protest or conflict?
I think the privilege of being British in the post-war era is that we have been able to, at times, even lionise war and certainly remember it in an extraordinarily revered and uncomplicated fashion. And what the Middle East is reminding us of is that war is also complicated, bloody, confusing and challenging. And I don't think in a country like ours, a great democracy like ours, that it's beyond us to manage those two different reflections of war at the same time.
Kulveer, it does feel slightly strange to say on a day where we celebrate people's, we grieve, but we celebrate sacrifices made for our freedom. We celebrate that freedom we gained from those sacrifices, that we then take away the freedoms of other people to protest.
I think the key there, though, Storm, is that we remember. We remember the sacrifices. I think celebrate's probably the way to move away from it. And I agree with Tessa on everybody has to be very careful about the tone we set around where we are right now. And what I mean by that is, Tessa talks about war and how we potentially lionise it and celebrate it. But where we are right now, we have two major wars raging in the world. We have now more than two, but ones that we're immediately front and centre and aware of what's happening in Ukraine and obviously Gaza and Israel. These are hugely complex, challenging periods for us. British society is built up of multifaceted cultures, faiths and people. And that's a fantastic, unique thing about British society. And our freedoms to express, that each member of that society be able to express themselves. When we talk about these marches, what we're saying is we've got different parts of our society wanting to express, wanting to have their view. And we have to be very careful in how we all come together to do this. The key concerns I hear about this is, will this become a lightning rod on the Saturday? Would there be more heated trouble potentially? Can the Metropolitan Police and other police forces who need to protect and manage these protests, do that in the context of what's going on. What we need is the leaders from all sides to ensure they set the right tone, the right message
Do you think
around
that's
what's
been
going
done?
on. I
I know you're a Conservative Lord, but do you feel that's being done at the moment?
I think every person who has a leadership position or a voice in this needs to ask for peace first, measured protest, and respect for what's going on in all these different areas, whether it's about Armistice Day itself and at the 11th hour of the 11th day when there will be those 2-minute silence that we, everyone either chooses to respect it or respect those people who are respecting it, and anything else that's going around that.
OK, we're going to go to calls. Ray from Hull, what's your thoughts? Do we cancel these marches that are due to take place, or that, a request has been put in?
Certainly not. In my view, the Armistice Day is all about remembering people who died in wars. And the marchers on Saturday are protesting against a war. So essentially, they're on the same side, or they should be viewed to be on the same side.
Yeah, I suppose part of the march, though, and actually, Tessa, you might be able to clear this up for us, part of the protest on Armistice Day is actually, I suppose, to make the general public aware of the British's involvement in what is the current conflict between Israel and Gaza.
Yes, and I think, hi Ray, this has become a very complicated issue generally, and we've been encouraged to think this in the way that we fought and won in World War I and World War II, which were generally seen as the morally right wars to fight and win, that the idea that our engagement with Israel, an ally of ours historically, someone we supply with armament, someone we've given vocal support to, that is it's a more nuanced arena, and we can see the civilian casualties almost outnumbering civilian casualties in Ukraine in a matter of weeks. And I think what we're seeing on the streets in some ways, and this is why I believe those protests are important, and it's important they're handled properly, we're seeing in the streets a balance or a counterbalance to the political narrative, which feels quite one-sided.
I'm not sure I agree with that. That's not... The protests are about taking a position from a Palestinian viewpoint, because they're the Palestinian protests. And there is another side to the argument. And I think we have to understand that. Whereas Remembrance and Armistice Day is about the entirety of sacrifice that there was there. So there is a difference between the two reasonings and what's going on here. OK,
I want to go back to the calls. Ray, though, thank you very much for your call. Broderick from London, how do you feel about this? I mean, it'll be taking part in your patch, presumably?
Yes. I'm most upset at the moment that the Palestinian people who are supporting the Palestinians should want to have a march that day. Most people in the world should know that this moment that we fought in the First World War, Second World War, the Americans, us, New Zealanders, Canada. Imagine if Hitler got through. Now, this is our moment for our soldiers that gave their lives all for this country.
Broderick, you're absolutely right. It's a mark of respect for those that gave their life to give us freedom. And part of that freedom is the freedom to protest. So it is slightly unusual to say that you're going to take away one of those freedoms for people so that we can have an Armistice Day to remember those that gave their lives for freedom. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but if they could have a sort of slightly respect and sort of keep it the way we've done it year after year after year, then have their march. They can have it all day, all the next day, but let's have a little bit of respect.
Well, they can't do it the next day because the next day would be Sunday, and I'm sure people would have an even bigger problem with that. But Tessa, what were you going to say?
I just wonder, Broderick, if, for example, on Saturday the 11th, if there was a march against Putin's invasion of Ukraine, would you feel differently? Is it because it's this sort of hot point, Palestine versus Israel, a sort of idea of a two-sided war, if you like, which has been divisive?
I'm not fully clued up on these wars, what started them, and, and I feel sorry for the people who are dying. Wars shouldn't happen.
So is it about? So it's about there being a protest of any sort on that day?
I feel it should be just for how we've been having it.
But then, isn't there an argument to say that, you know, least we forget. We wear a poppy so we remember those that had to give their lives for this freedom so we don't enter into another war. Isn't it actually the most opportune time for people to come out? We're saying pro-Palestine, but there's plenty of Israelis taking part in these protests as well, to come out and say, we need a ceasefire. We need to not forget the damage that goes on for generations after war. This is imperative that we get a ceasefire. Isn't it actually probably the most poignant and the most perfect time to do one of these protests?
I feel it will cause tension amongst quite a few people, especially the elderly.
You might be right, and it may be the last Armistice Day for some of these.
Well, it will be.
Well.
It certainly will be.
I want to come back to Broderick's point because it's about respect. And I think the remembrance side is the respect side. The thing that's concerning people is, will the protest, which is a protest about an argument that there currently is going on, going to disrespect the remembrance side?